In 2006, West Ham United pulled off a transfer coup that stunned the footballing world, beating some of England's biggest clubs to the signings of Tevez and Javier Mascherano on deadline day. What followed was months of controversy, legal trouble and footballing drama that saw Tevez keep West Ham in the Premier League against all odds. And in this video, we'll be looking at the illegal transfer that saved West Ham. Just weeks earlier, the World Cup in Germany was held, and it was here that Tevez and Mascherano began to properly introduce themselves to the world, impressing for Argentina as they made it to the quarterfinals before bowing out on penalties to the host Germany. At club level, the duo were playing for the reigning Brazilian champions Corinthians and were poised for moves to some of Europe's biggest clubs. Tevez was the standout player of the two, captaining Corinthians to the title and scoring 20 goals in the process, being named the player of the season. This saw him be strongly linked to a move to Mourinho's Chelsea, who had just won the Premier League for a second consecutive season, and the likes of Manchester United and Arsenal were reportedly interested in him too and were willing to pay upwards of £40 million. For a club like West Ham, who had just finished in mid-table, the idea of signing one, let alone two world-class players, seemed nothing short of a fantasy. But alas, deadline day arrived, and images of Tevez and Javier Mascherano holding West Ham shirts alongside a beaming Alan Pardew began to dominate the papers. The signings had come completely out of the blue and sent shockwaves through the footballing world. West Ham's statement on the signings was cryptic, saying the pair have been signed for an undisclosed fee and that all other aspects of the transfers will remain confidential and undisclosed. It was that final line that raised suspicion, and fans and pundits alike were left scratching their heads. West Ham's most expensive signing to date was Dean Ashton for just under £10 million, so for them to sign two high-in-demand players fresh off an impressive World Cup campaign just didn't make any financial sense. It was dodgy from the start, and it eventually came to light that the signings were completely illegal. The Premier League discovered West Ham had breached rules on third-party ownership, as the rights to Tevez and Mascherano were partially held by Media Sports Investment, owned by Kia Grabshin. Back in 2004, MSI purchased 51% of Corinthians, and in order to pay off debts, they invested directly into the club and claimed the economic rights of some of the players signed under their ownership, notably Tevez and Mascherano. Essentially, West Ham was simply borrowing the players from a third party and hadn't actually signed them, with there being a clause in their contract that allowed MSI to agree and move elsewhere for them, with West Ham having no legal way to prevent a deal. With deals involving third-party ownership being banned, West Ham shouldn't have been able to sign the duo, and it explains why they didn't want to reveal some of the finer details in the announcement. Terry Brown, who owned West Ham at the time of the deal, had already left the club by the time their wrongdoings were revealed, however, selling the club to an Icelandic consortium in November 2006. The club was left in deep trouble, and their relegation rivals demanded a points deduction, which would have sealed West Ham's demotion to the Championship. This deduction never came though, and instead the Premier League fined them £5.5 million, the largest fine in Premier League history. But their rivals weren't satisfied, with there being shouts of big club buyers. While the deduction would have secured West Ham's doom, at one point it seemed like West Ham being relegated was a certainty regardless of deduction, sitting at the bottom of the league 10 points off safety with just 9 games to go. However, amongst the chaos, a hero emerged in Tevez, a player who shouldn't have even been playing for the club. His end of season heroics were unexpected, as although his arrival had a lot of hype up until the run-in, he and his Argentinian compatriot had been flops. Mascherano, for instance, failed to cement himself in a starting 11, only making 5 league appearances for the London-based side before his move to Liverpool. Tevez, on the other hand, didn't score a single goal for the Hammers under the management of Alan Pardew, and even threw a tantrum after an early substitution in a match against Sheffield United, leaving the ground before the final whistle. The team as a whole were doing dreadfully, and at their worst, they went on a 9-game winning streak, with 8 of those being losses, seeing Pardew be sacked and replaced by Alan Kirbishley, who had managed Charlton Athletic for the past 15 years. Things finally clicked a few months into Alan Kirbishley's reign, with Tevez recovering from his rocky start and going on a run that would ultimately save West Ham from the fate of relegation. The club won 7 out of their final 9 games, with Tevez scoring 6 goals during this period, with the most important of them all coming against the Premier League champions Manchester United on the final day of the season. West Ham went into the match knowing at least a draw was secured their survival, and at the stroke of half time they became one step closer to pulling off the great escape when Tevez struck the ball into the back of the net. As it stood, West Ham was staying up, when just a few months earlier relegation seemed inevitable. The two teams headed back onto the field for the second half, and despite the pressure, West Ham held onto their lead, seeing the Hammers stay up at the expense of Sheffield United. Sheffield United would go on to take West Ham to a tribunal and were awarded a £20 million out-of-court settlement in 2009, with it being agreed Tevez's goals were the difference between Sheffield United getting relegated and West Ham surviving. Tevez at that point had already left the club for Manchester United a couple years earlier, and although his stint with West Ham was short, he had cemented himself as a cult hero, going down as the illegal signing that saved West Ham from relegation.